Welcome to the Bible Story Podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at a story where Jesus casts out demons from two men. Now, last week we looked at a story that gave us a unique perspective of Jesus as Jesus was crossing over the Sea of Galilee during a storm with his disciples. Now, this is the second story in a three-part series in which we're looking at miracles of Jesus that show us how Jesus has authority over all. Today's story is found in Matthew chapter 8, and Jesus is casting out demons within these two men. Now, before we get into all of that, there's a little bit of background. Now, Jesus had been healing a lot of people up to this point and teaching, and his popularity was growing significantly. Now, on their trip across the Sea of Galilee, Jesus calms the storm, calms the waves, and the disciples are absolutely astonished as to what Jesus has just done. He's done something that they didn't think was possible. Even though they cried out to him for help while he was sleeping underneath, they just didn't see this as something that would happen. And so they're left there shocked, and they get a glimpse of Jesus' perspective. And we also get a same glimpse of that perspective. Today's story is found in Matthew chapter 8, verses 28 to 34. Let me read it for you. When Jesus arrived on the other side of the lake in the region of the Gadarenes, two men who were possessed by demons met him. They came out of the tombs and were so violent that no one could go through that area. They began screaming at him, "Why are you interfering with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torture us before God's appointed time?" There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding in the distance. So the demons begged, "If you cast us out, send us into that herd of pigs." "All right, go," Jesus commanded them. So the demons came out of the men and entered the pigs, and the whole herd plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. The herdsmen fled to the nearby town, telling everyone what happened to the demon-possessed men. The entire town came out to meet Jesus, but they begged him to go away and leave them alone. So the story starts out in verse 28, and we learn of these two demon-possessed men. And they were so violent that nobody went into this area of these tombs where they hung out or possibly lived. It was a very dangerous place for people to go. That makes me wonder what kind of stories, what kind of hurts, what kind of tragedies occurred at the hands of these two demon-possessed men. It's hard to imagine, but it had to have been extreme for nobody to want to go there. In verse 29, they start screaming at Jesus and speaking to him harshly. And then in verse 30, they show their cards. They show that they are actually afraid of Jesus, and they ask for a less harsh outcome than what could have been by asking Jesus to permission or to cast them into these pigs instead of possessing these men. Verse 31, 32, the pigs rush down into the lake, they drown, the herdsmen go back to town, they tell the people come out to meet Jesus, and they say, "You gotta leave, you can't be here, it's too much for us." So that's the story. Let me share with you a few details or a few things that I think are important for us to remember, okay? First of all, the demons struck fear in all these people, but they weren't violent towards Jesus. They knew who Jesus was. They called him the Son of God. And so that tells me that they have this twisted respect. On one hand, they're screaming at him, and at the other hand, they're just not willing to mess with him. They knew who he was. And they specifically talk about Jesus torturing them before the appointed time, which I gotta say, that sounds a little bit strange. It doesn't sound like Jesus. But we have to understand that Jesus is the ultimate judge. The appointed time refers to the time of judgment. Now, they will be found guilty as these demons for doing the things that they've done. And they will be thrown into hell. And they will experience eternal punishment for their rebellion and sin. So last week we noted that Jesus had a unique perspective while on the boat. And he questioned the disciples why they were afraid and why they didn't have more faith. And we see that Jesus had this perspective that God is greater, that God is for us, and that God is with us. Today's episode, we see this unique vantage point, not from Jesus this time, but from the demons. And we actually can learn quite a bit from these demons' vantage point or their perspective. Now, the demons recognize Jesus as the ultimate authority, the one who will judge, who is the judge. And they fear him because of that. They fear him because they have done things that are wrong. They have rebelled against God. They know what Jesus can do to them, and they actually are pretty terrified about that prospect. So they don't mess with him. Verse 28 tells us that these two men were so violent, these demon-possessed men were so violent that nobody went to that area. They avoided it. But Jesus is there. And these men, while they screamed at him, they have done nothing physically to him. They have done nothing to harm him. And I think that's a really important thing for us to note, that he has authority over demons. He has authority over the unseen world. He has authority over all. The second thing that is important for us to note here is that the demons know that Jesus will honor God's word and promises. They are surprised to see Jesus show up here, and they are not really sure what to do about all of this. But when they see the Son of God, they remind Jesus that it is not the appointed time for judgment yet. It's not yet. It will be one day, but it's not now. And so it's an interesting thing that they know of these things. And second, it's interesting that they feel the need to remind Jesus that the judgment time is not yet. Now, it's interesting to note that angels and demons, along with humanity, will be judged. And that is kind of a startling thought. In fact, hell was first created for fallen angels, demons, Satan. Listen to what Jesus says in a story that he's telling people in Matthew chapter 25, verse 41. It says this, "Then the king," which is referring to God in the story, "will turn to those on the left and say, 'Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons.'" Okay, before we get to our third point, let's recap. The demons recognize that Jesus has the ultimate authority and he is the judge. And then second thing, that the demons know that Jesus will honor God's word and his promises. The third thing is this. The demons know that Jesus is merciful. They know his character is full of mercy. Now, this seems a little bit surprising, but the reality is they're counting on Jesus' mercy in this story. Now, they quickly devise this plan, knowing that Jesus could be casting them out of the men and into hell here and now. And so they create this plan, they devise this plan, say, if you cast us out, if you're going to do that, cast us into those, let us go into those pigs, that herd of pigs. And so Jesus considers that and very quickly responds, yes, go. And so they go. And it's a surprise twist to this story. We don't expect Jesus to comply with what the demons have proposed here, but he does. And it's this small degree of mercy that Jesus offers them, which I find really quite interesting. Jesus allows them to enter the pigs. The pigs run down the steep hillside or the cliff. They fall into the lake. They drown. And that, we really don't know what happens to the demons after that. But it's this willingness of Jesus to show this small degree of mercy that I'm not sure that it tells me that maybe I don't fully understand the depth of God's desire, Jesus' desire to show mercy to the world. This desire is bigger than I maybe once thought. Okay, so let me recap. Jesus has the ultimate authority as judge. Jesus will honor God's word and his promises. And Jesus is merciful. Our world would do well, you and I would do well to remember these three things that the demons knew. Let's get into some discussion questions now. Question number 1. Jesus has authority over all and is the judge over all. What should people's response be to Jesus as their judge? Hit pause and share. Question number 2. As a group, list some promises of God that are important for us to remember. Hit pause and discuss. Question number 3. Share stories of mercy from your own lives with one another. Hit pause and share. Thank you for hanging out with me, taking some time to learn a little bit about God's Word and growing in your relationship with Him. End your time in prayer, and I'm going to challenge you, as you pray with one another, confess your shortcomings to one another. Ask God for healing. There's some good things that will come out of it. And I tell you this because of the 3 things that we learned today. Remember, Jesus has the ultimate authority as judge. Jesus will honor God's words and his promises, and Jesus is merciful. I will be praying for you guys throughout this week. Take care.